Good evening and welcome to Armageddon Live, Introduction Recap, on this 27th of March 2020. I'm your host, Daniel Decrypted. Now, I thought it was important because my introduction video was so long that I should try and do a recap or summary of it so that you don't have to spend the 40 minutes there watching it. So that's what this is going to be. You'll recall the reason that I did this little introduction is, well, if you haven't watched it, then you won't recall that, but the reason for it is that when we look out into the world right now, we see a lot of fear. And my point was, or what I said is that, yes, there's a lot of bad things in the world, but we shouldn't be afraid because Jesus is coming. Let me get out of the way here. Yes. So even though there's all these bad things coming, it should actually be a joyful time for us because it shows us that Jesus is coming. But how can we truly be sure that Jesus is coming? Here we go. Because prophecy says so. Prophecy plus current events. And it's not the current events like COVID-19. I mean, that's not the type of current events I'm talking about. I'm talking about other things. But one of the other things I brought up about prophecy is, right, if you're not Christian, if you're a believer in another faith group, or you're an atheist, what do you care about prophecy, right? Well, the interesting thing about prophecy is prophecy proves that God is real. And so prophecy then is a challenge to non-Christians, as well as it's a challenge to the atheist. Because the point is that we can't, as humans, we can't predict the future. Especially when the future is like 2,500 years in the future. And that's what prophecy deals with. It deals with 2,500 years of history. Starting from about 500 BC in the Babylonian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, coming all the way up until our times. But of course, how do we know that Jesus is coming? Because prophecy deals with current events. And so by current events, I should say, we know that Jesus is coming soon. And so don't be afraid. Lift your head and look to the sky. Look to Jesus. Look to God. Anyway, so what are those current events I'm talking about? Well, one of those current events that is part of prophecy is September 11th, 2001, 9/11. And then there would be ISIL, the Syrian war, and its repercussions, right? That's June 2014 to December 2015, and then beyond past that. Then there's also the Paris attacks, November 13th, 2015. So these are all part of prophecy. In fact, they come out of the 7 trumpets, especially the 7th, and Joel. And we'll be talking about that in the days to come. I'll be showing you how we know that these events are talked about in there. What other current events? Well, Francis, the Jesuit Pope. 2013 to the present. This comes out of the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 11. And once again, in the days to come, we'll be discussing this. I'll show you how we know that Pope Francis is there, or how we know that Pope Francis is important because of this chapter. What other current events? When Pope Francis came to Washington, D.C. That, of course, is September 24th, 2015. This is in prophecy because of the history of the United States, but also because of Daniel 11, once again. It's also because of, well, specifically, this is the colonies, the setting up of the colonies, but also the history of Washington, D.C. And once again, I'll be discussing this in the days to come. I'm hoping that these little things are going to be little teasers for you to convince you that maybe this is something worth spending time with. Alright, what other current events? Reagan and Pope John Paul II joining up together. As you can see from the Time magazine, Time called it the Holy Alliance. An alliance that was formed Monday, February 24th, 1982, to bring down communism in Poland. It eventually, from what they did there, it eventually brought down the Soviet Union. That's the 25th of December, 1991. Well, actually, I didn't. This is talked about in Daniel chapter 11. Yes, Daniel chapter 11. And we'll talk about that in the days to come. Next current event is the joining up of Lutherans and Catholics. It was signaled by this document here, From Conflict to Communion, which was printed in 2013 and made public to the world by, you see the subtitle on the document, Lutheran Catholic Common Commemoration of the Reformation in 2017. So, it was made public to the world, visible to the world, when Catholics and Lutherans celebrated the 500th year anniversary of the Reformation in 2017. And lastly, we have gay marriage. That's the legalization nationwide of same-sex marriage. June 26, 2015 in the United States. This is also part of prophecy. All of these things, in fact, come out of Luke 17 and Matthew 24. Once again, in the days to come, I'll show you how we know that these things are there. Alright, lastly, we have Spiritualism, which rose in March 31st, 1848. These three women here are the Fox sisters, and this started the movement of seances, talking to the dead. The next event is the rise of Pentecostalism, which is started April 9th, 1906. And this, from this rose the Pentecostal churches. But then you had the speaking in tongues, I don't know what you would call, anyway, the things that are very particular to Pentecostalism, like speaking in tongues. But then that came into the mainline churches in the charismatic movement in the 1960s. Lastly, we have the coming together of Copeland, Palmer, and Francis. That's Kenneth Copeland, Tony Palmer, a bishop in, I forget what the branch of which church it is. Anyway, and then Pope Francis. This happened at Kenneth Copeland Ministers Conference on January 21st, 2014. The Pope, through Tony Palmer, sent a video message to Kenneth Copeland and the ministers that were meeting at his conference. And the Pope invited the churches to come together. And Kenneth Copeland embraced it. Alright, so all of these different events, these current events, come out of Revelation 10, 13, and 16. But once again, in the days to come, we'll be discussing these. I'll be showing you how we know that these things come out of there. Last but not least, we'll be discussing, in the days to come, we'll be discussing this little guy here. I hope what I've said up until now is it piques your interest and that you'll join me. Aside from talking about current events, though, we'll be talking about the decryption of prophecy. As I mentioned in some of my previous streams, live streams, or one of my previous live streams, the reason that prophecy is written with symbolism and various other things is so that it will be encrypted. Because according to the Bible, there are two sides at war, God's side and the devil's side. And to keep the devil and his minions and those who have joined up with him from the human race, to keep them from knowing from not just knowing from, but if they found out that this was in the Bible, because prophecy reveals the devil's plans, but if this were common knowledge, then there would be a desire to destroy the Bible, so that this information was not available to God's people. So that's why we have, in prophecy, they are symbolic. There's symbols, there's names with symbolic meaning, and then there's this structure. So once again, there are basically three different methods that are being used to encrypt the message that's in prophecy. One is the use of symbols, like beasts or water, or right. Each of these things have a literal meaning to them. But there's also the use of names, like Jezebel, or Armageddon, or what else? Pergamos, or Ephesus, or all of these names. They are not supposed to be just left as names. They're supposed to be translated because they have a symbolic meaning. And lastly, so there's symbols, names, and then we have structure. And then there's some other things too. There's patterns. But all of these things we'll be discussing in the days to come. So I know that most Christians, they know about symbolism. They might also know about the symbolic meaning of names, but very few probably know about structure. So I'm hoping that this will be an incentive for you to come and listen on these live streams, especially since so many people are at home because of COVID-19. So anyway, so this is the structure for Daniel 9. We also have this, which you've seen already, the structure of Daniel 11, which we'll be discussing in the days to come. And finally, we have the structure of Revelation 1 through chapter 1. The structure of Revelation chapters 1 through 16. So there's, of course, there's many more structures other than this. There's big structures, small structures, there's structures that span the whole New Testament. But they all have information, right? Just like this symbolism and names, they all encrypt information. They all carry information with them. So if you know how to read them, then you can extract that information. So I invite you to join me for that thing too, so that you can learn to read these structures and extract the information that's included in them. And then, of course, we have the United States. Now, I think everybody knows that the United States is the most powerful nation in the world at this time. So, would it be surprising to hear that prophecy talks about the United States? It shouldn't be. Not since the United States is the most powerful nation in the world, you would expect it to be in prophecy. And indeed it is. And that is why we'll be discussing the history of the United States. We'll be discussing the rise of the colonies, District of Columbia, I should say, Washington, D.C., the founders of Washington, D.C., that is the first settlers in the area of where Washington, D.C. is. And we'll be discussing some of the features of Washington, D.C., such as the Capitol, the Washington Monument, because all of these come into prophecy. Through prophecy, there's different things that are revealed about these different features of Washington, D.C. that you might not be aware of otherwise. So, I guess that's it. I hope that was a short enough recap for everybody to make everybody happy. I mean, there's less of me jabbering on about who knows what. So I'm hoping it's a little easier for you to digest. And I hope that this will really pique your interest. And, well, I say good night, God bless, and I look forward to seeing you in the days to come.